The small town of Brookside was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. It wasn't flashy or busy like the big cities, but that was exactly what made it feel safe and comforting. Streets were lined with modest houses, small shops, and the occasional park where children played until the sun went down. At the center of this town, tucked between a little grocery store and a gas station, was Lila's Diner. The sign above the door read, "Lila's Place," in bright, welcoming letters, and it had been part of the town for years. People came, not just for the food, though the pancakes, fried chicken, and fresh pies were hard to beat, but because of Lila herself. Lila was in her mid-40s, a strong and confident woman, with a calm energy that put people at ease. She had grown up in Brookside, learned how to cook from her mother, and always dreamed of having a place where people felt welcome. Running. Her diner was more than a job. It was her way of connecting with the world, making a small but meaningful difference in the lives of those who walked through her doors. Every morning she would open at 6, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filling the air, and people would start trickling in, some regulars, some travelers passing through. That particular afternoon, the diner was quieter than usual. A few locals sat at the counter talking softly, and Lila was wiping down the tables, humming an old tune she had learned from her mother. The sun shone through the windows, casting warm light on the worn wooden floors. Everything seemed calm and ordinary, just like any other day. Lila liked days like this when life felt simple and predictable. She liked knowing her diner was a safe space, where people could escape their worries for a little while. Then, the sound of a motorcycle cut through the calm. At first, Lila thought it might just be a traveler passing by, but the bike slowed and pulled into the small parking lot in front of her diner. The engine was loud and deep, demanding attention. A man in black leather gear swung off the bike with a steady grace, adjusting his helmet as he approached the entrance. There was something about him that made people glance up from their meals. He looked rough, with tattoos visible on his arms and a serious expression on his face. He was the kind of person who drew curiosity, maybe even a little fear, simply because of how different he seemed from the quiet townsfolk. Lila didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and smiled, as she always did. "Hey there," she said warmly. "You hungry?" The man paused, his eyes scanning the diner, noticing the small, cozy space filled with sunlight and the smell of home-cooked food. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if he wasn't expecting such a welcoming smile. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Water, and maybe something to eat." Lila nodded and gestured him to a booth near the window. "Take a seat. I'll get you something in a minute." As she prepared a plate of food, she stole a glance at the man. There was tension in the way he sat, a kind of careful alertness that suggested he wasn't used to letting his guard down. Yet, there was also something human in him, something that made her want to offer kindness rather than suspicion. She didn't know who he was or why he was here, but she felt a pull, a responsibility to treat him with respect. She set the plate down in front of him, and he gave a small nod of thanks, almost shyly. A few of the locals watched him from a distance, whispering quietly to one another. Some of them recognized him from the town gossip, a biker who was said to be part of a notorious motorcycle club. Others simply judged him by his appearance, tattoos, leather, the rough exterior. But Lila ignored the murmurs. She had learned over the years that people often carried stories behind their faces, stories no one could see unless they made the effort to look. She didn't believe in judging anyone at first glance. The man, who introduced himself as Cole, ate quietly, savoring the food as if it were a rare comfort. He spoke little, but Lila noticed how careful he was not to spill anything or make a scene. There was a quiet dignity in him, a sense that he had seen a lot and trusted very little. Lila felt a strange connection, a reminder that beneath the surface, everyone was just trying to survive in their own way. Suddenly, the calm of the afternoon was interrupted by the distant sound of sirens. Lila's heart skipped a beat, a sudden wave of tension running through her. Within moments, police cars pulled up outside the diner, lights flashing. Officers stepped out, moving quickly toward the entrance. They looked serious, professional, and unyielding, and Lila could feel the weight of the situation before they even spoke. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions," one officer said, addressing Cole immediately. His tone was sharp, commanding attention, leaving no room for resistance. Cole remained calm, but there was a hint of caution in his eyes. Lila could sense the potential for conflict, and instinctively, she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but polite. "This is my diner. Please don't harass him here without a proper reason." The officer turned toward her, surprised by her assertiveness. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job," he replied, his voice still authoritative. "I understand that," Lila said calmly, placing herself between Cole and the officer. "But this is a place where people should feel safe. If you have questions, please come back with a warrant. Right now, you need to leave." The diner went silent. Patrons held their breath, watching the tense standoff unfold. Lila's words weren't loud or angry, but they carried weight. There was a quiet authority in the way she stood, a sense that she wasn't willing to let fear or prejudice dictate her actions. Cole gave a small, grateful nod. He didn't speak, but Lila could see the relief in his eyes. The officers exchanged a glance, frustrated but unwilling to escalate in front of witnesses. After a tense moment, they finally stepped back and left, their sirens fading into the distance. When the door closed behind them, the diner let out a collective sigh. Patrons returned to their meals, murmuring quietly about what had just happened. Lila felt a rush of emotions: relief, pride, and a strange sense of anticipation. As if the afternoon had marked the beginning of something bigger, she looked at Cole, who gave her a faint smile, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Lila replied, "but it was the right thing to do." For the rest of the afternoon, Cole stayed at the diner, eating, drinking coffee, and quietly observing. Lila continued her work, serving customers and keeping the atmosphere light, but her mind kept returning to the events that had just unfolded. She realized that kindness and courage often came hand in hand. Sometimes, standing up for someone else, even when it seemed risky, was the only choice a person could make. As the sun began to set, Cole finally prepared to leave. He mounted his bike, giving Lila one last nod. "I won't forget this," he said. "I hope not," Lila replied with a small smile. As he rode away, Lila closed the diner for the evening, feeling a mix of exhaustion and fulfillment. The day had started like any other, calm and ordinary, but it had ended with a lesson she would carry forever. Courage wasn't about fighting. Sometimes it was simply about standing firm, showing empathy, and protecting what was right, even when no one else would. And as she locked the door and walked home, the quiet streets of Brookside seemed different. There was a ripple in the air, a sense that life was unpredictable, and that even in a small town, one person's actions could create waves far beyond what anyone could imagine. Lila didn't know it yet, but this afternoon was only the beginning of a story that would soon involve hundreds of people, loyalty, and a level of gratitude that she had never experienced before. The morning after the tense encounter, Lila opened, her diner feeling a strange mix of curiosity and unease. The town seemed ordinary as usual, children walking to school, neighbors chatting on porches, the old bakery releasing its familiar smell into the air. But in her mind, the events of the previous afternoon lingered. Cole, the man she had helped, wasn't just another stranger. He was someone from a world she had only seen from a distance, stories told by fearful whispers and town gossip. A world of motorcycles, leather jackets, tattoos, and rules that she didn't fully understand. And yet, yesterday, he had appeared human, vulnerable, and in need of protection. Lila tried to focus on her work. She set tables, brewed coffee, and flipped pancakes as she always did, letting the aroma fill the diner. A few regulars arrived, greeting her with friendly smiles and small talk. She answered their questions about yesterday's incident with a careful, neutral tone. "Yes, a man came in," she said lightly. "Everything is fine now." Some of them nodded, seemingly satisfied, though she could sense curiosity behind their words. People loved stories about danger and courage, and her actions yesterday had clearly sparked interest. By mid-morning, the calm was broken in a way that made her stomach tighten. The distant sound of engines filled the air, not one or two motorcycles, but several. Lila paused, listening. She could hear the low rumble, steady and purposeful. The hair on her arms stood up slightly, not from fear but from instinct. Something was happening, and she had no way of knowing what it was. She went outside, wiping her hands on a towel, and looked down the street. A small group of bikers was approaching, not too large, but enough to make her notice. They rode slowly, scanning the town, their presence commanding attention. Lila's heart beat faster, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had no idea what they wanted or whether they posed a threat. Her first thought was to prepare for anything, to make sure the diner and her patrons were safe. The lead biker stopped in front of her diner and removed his helmet. It was Cole. He gave a small nod, the kind that carried respect and gratitude all at once. Behind him, a handful of other bikers waited, scanning the street, their expressions unreadable. Lila felt a flicker of relief, but also realized that this could escalate at any moment. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Good morning," she said carefully. "Can I help you?" Cole smiled faintly. "Morning. We just want to talk for a minute." "Nothing more." She nodded, gesturing for them to come inside. The diners who were present watched silently, unsure of what to expect. Cole and the others filed into the diner, and Lila felt a sudden awareness of the delicate balance in the room. These were men who had a reputation, men who could be dangerous if provoked. And yet, they were here voluntarily, calm, almost cautious in their movements. Cole spoke first, his voice low and steady. "We heard about what happened yesterday," he said. "We just wanted to say, thank you. You didn't have to do what you did. You could have stayed out of it, but you didn't." Lila shook her head. "I didn't do anything special, I just thought it was the right thing to do." A few bikers exchanged glances, some nodding, others smiling slightly. They didn't speak much, but their presence carried a quiet intensity. Lila realized that in their world, actions mattered more than words. Her simple act of standing up for Cole had made a difference far beyond her imagination. As the morning wore on, the bikers ordered coffee and breakfast. They were polite, careful not to make a scene. Lila served them with her usual calm demeanor, though inside she felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't every day that her diner hosted people from such a different world, people whose loyalty ran deep and whose respect was earned through action. One of the bikers, a tall man with a long beard and a leather vest, spoke quietly to Cole. Lila didn't catch all the words, but she sensed there was coordination, a sense of loyalty and communication she hadn't seen before. These men were connected in a way that went beyond friendship. They were a family, and she had just become an unexpected part of their story. After a while, Cole spoke again, this time addressing the whole diner. "We don't usually do this," he said, "but someone stepped up for one of us. That doesn't go unnoticed. We make sure people remember that." The bikers nodded in agreement. Some of them looked directly at Lila, eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and seriousness. It was clear that her actions yesterday had earned something rare, respect from people who didn't hand it out lightly. Though she felt proud, Lila also felt a hint of worry. This kind of attention could be dangerous. She had read stories, heard rumors, and seen movies that painted bikers as unpredictable, sometimes violent. She kept reminding herself that she didn't know them, that she should remain cautious, but it was hard not to feel a sense of connection. These men were here because of her, because she had shown compassion and courage when it mattered. Throughout the morning, the town itself seemed to react subtly. People who passed by slowed down, watching the bikers with curiosity. A few whispered to each other, trying to make sense of the unusual sight. Lila noticed a couple of familiar neighbors peeking through the diner windows, unsure whether to enter or simply observe. She didn't mind their curiosity. In fact, she welcomed it, because it reminded her that courage often inspired others, even if quietly. By late morning, the bikers began to leave one by one. Cole stayed a moment longer, walking over to Lila. "You're different," he said, almost to himself. Most people would have been scared. Most people would have called the cops or worse. But you didn't hesitate. You stood up for what was right. Lila smiled softly, shaking her head. "I just did what anyone should do." Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Cole's eyes met hers, and in that moment Lila felt a deep sense of connection. She realized that sometimes courage wasn't about fighting or showing strength in the obvious way. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was choosing humanity over fear. And sometimes it could change the way people saw the world and each other. As Cole mounted his bike and rode off, Lila felt a strange calm. The diner returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of conversation, clinking dishes, and the aroma of fresh food filling the air. But something had shifted. The world felt slightly bigger, more unpredictable, and more connected than before. She understood that her actions had consequences far beyond what she could see. Later that afternoon, she couldn't help but reflect on the events. Standing up to the police had been nerve-wracking, yes, but she had done it because she knew it was right. Hosting the bikers had been unexpected, even intimidating. Yet it had been rewarding in a way that words couldn't capture. Lila realized that life often tested people in moments they didn't expect, and courage showed itself in the way one responded. As evening approached, she closed the diner, locking the doors with care. The streets of Brookside were quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Lila walked home slowly, feeling both exhaustion and a quiet sense of pride. She had faced an unusual situation, one that could have gone badly, but she had handled it with calm, empathy, and courage. And in return, she had earned something rare: respect from people who valued loyalty, honor, and humanity above all else. Lila didn't know what the next day would bring, but she had a feeling it would be unlike anything she had experienced before. The ripple of yesterday's courage was only beginning, and she had a sense that it would reach far beyond her diner, beyond the quiet streets of Brookside, and into a world she had never imagined being part of. And with that thought, she stepped inside her home, closing the door gently behind her, ready for whatever came next, grounded in the quiet confidence that doing the right thing was always worth it, no matter the consequences. The next morning, Lila opened the diner with a sense of cautious curiosity. The sun was soft and golden as it spread across the quiet streets of Brookside, and the familiar smells of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the small space. Life seemed ordinary at first glance, but Lila had a feeling that things were changing, that the calm of the town was only surface deep. She couldn't shake the memory of yesterday, the tension, the police, and then Cole and the bikers who had filled her diner with quiet respect and gratitude. As she flipped pancakes and arranged plates of eggs and toast, she noticed a few more locals coming in than usual. Some greeted her warmly. Others cast curious glances at the empty booths where Cole and his friends had sat. Whispers spread quietly through the diner, and Lila could feel the subtle energy shift. People were talking about her, about what she had done, about the way she had stood up for a stranger when most would have stayed silent. She kept her attention on her work, though she couldn't deny a small swell of pride mixed with nervousness. By mid-morning, the familiar hum of conversation was interrupted by the deep, resonant sound of motorcycles approaching. This time there were more than a few. Lila paused and wiped her hands on a towel, her heart picking up speed. She went to the window and saw a small group of bikers riding slowly down the street, their engines echoing through the town. They weren't aggressive or threatening. They moved with a sense of purpose, scanning the area. But there was no hostility in their demeanor. It didn't take long for the locals to notice. Children paused in their play, neighbors stepped out onto their porches, and shopkeepers peered out of windows. The town of Brookside, usually quiet and predictable, was beginning to feel a little more alive, a little more uncertain, and very much aware that something unusual was happening. Lila felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She had no idea why they were here, but instinct told her it had something to do with Cole. The bikers parked their motorcycles in neat rows outside the diner. Lila watched as more and more riders arrived, their leather jackets catching the sunlight, their helmets reflecting the street in small, glimmering shards. There were at least a dozen, maybe more. The numbers made her take a careful step back inside, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had handled tension before, and she could handle this too. Cole stepped off his bike first. He removed his helmet and walked confidently toward the diner, a faint smile on his face. Lila felt a flicker of relief at seeing a familiar face. Cole was calm as always, but there was an intensity in his gaze that suggested this was serious. The other bikers followed, forming a respectful line behind him. They didn't push or crowd the diner. They waited, giving space while making their presence known. "Good morning," Cole said, his voice carrying over the soft hum of the engines. "We're here to talk." Lila nodded, gesturing for them to come inside. The diners inside stared in surprise as the bikers filed into the space. The smell of leather, motorcycles, and oil mingled faintly with the familiar aroma of breakfast. Lila felt a strange mix of pride and nervousness. She reminded herself that these people were not here to cause trouble. They were here because of something she had done, something that mattered to them more than she could imagine. Once inside, the bikers took their seats carefully. Some chose booths, others sat at the counter. None of them spoke immediately. Lila continued her work, serving coffee and plates of food, careful to maintain a calm atmosphere. The presence of so many bikers could have been intimidating, but there was an unspoken respect in the way they moved and interacted. It was clear they had rules, a code that governed them, and they respected her space. After a moment, Cole addressed the group. "We've been talking," he said quietly, "and we want to make sure you understand something. What you did yesterday, it doesn't happen every day. People don't stand up when they should. You could have ignored me or worse, called the police, but you didn't. You showed courage. You showed humanity, and that matters to us." The bikers nodded, some murmuring agreement. Lila felt a flush of emotion. She had never expected recognition like this. She had acted out of instinct, out of a sense of what was right, not to earn respect or attention, and yet, here it was, in a form she had never experienced before. One of the taller bikers spoke next, his voice deep and steady. "We stick together. Loyalty is everything to us. When someone outside our world shows the same kind of loyalty, we notice. We remember. That's why we're here." Lila nodded, listening carefully. She understood the words, but she also sensed the weight behind them. In their world, actions carried meaning far beyond words. The fact that she had defended Cole in front of the police had resonated deeply. Her simple act of standing up for what was right had crossed a line into their lives in a way she hadn't anticipated. The morning passed slowly, with the bikers talking quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing at Lila. She served them breakfast, coffee, and even some pie, doing her best to maintain a normal atmosphere. Patrons of the diner, who had initially watched with curiosity, began to relax, realizing that the bikers were not there to intimidate or cause trouble. They were there to honor something larger than themselves, a quiet act of bravery that had made a difference. As the hours went on, Lila began to see the subtle ways in which her actions had begun to ripple through their community. Cole stayed close to her side at times, quietly explaining things in hushed tones. He told her that the bikers valued loyalty, courage, and respect above all else. By protecting him, she had earned a kind of informal recognition in a world she barely knew existed, and it wasn't just about recognition. Cole explained that her actions had created trust, a bridge between her world and theirs. They respected her because she had treated him as a human being, not as a threat or a stereotype. In a world where assumptions could lead to violence or misunderstanding, her kindness and courage had changed everything. Lila listened carefully, feeling both humbled and amazed. She had never thought of herself as a hero. She had simply done what she felt was right. But the bikers' presence, their quiet gratitude, and the respect in their eyes showed her that even small actions could have far-reaching consequences. Courage and kindness, she realized, were powerful forces, capable of creating change in ways one could never predict. By late afternoon, the bikers began to prepare to leave. Cole walked over to her, his expression serious but kind. "We'll be back," he said simply. "Not to cause trouble, but to make sure you know that what you did didn't go unnoticed. There are more people who need to see that kindness exists even in the toughest of places. You've shown them that." Lila nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride mixed with humility. She had acted out of instinct and compassion, and now she understood that her actions could inspire others, even in unexpected ways. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and rode off, their engines echoing down the streets of Brookside, Lila felt a quiet sense of awe. The town had returned to its usual rhythm, but she knew that things had changed. The ripple of her courage was spreading quietly, steadily, and she had no idea how far it might go. Closing the diner that evening, Lila walked home slowly, thinking about what she had learned. Courage wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, Sometimes it was standing firm when others wouldn't. Sometimes it was recognizing the humanity in someone and refusing to let fear or prejudice dictate one's actions. She realized that life often presented unexpected tests, and that the way one responded could change not just their own world, but the worlds of others. And as she turned the key in her front door, the quiet streets of Brookside seemed a little different, a little larger and a little more connected. Lila knew that the story was far from over, and that the next day would bring new challenges, new surprises, and new opportunities to see how one act of courage could create waves far beyond what she could imagine. For the first time in a long while, Lila felt ready for whatever came next. She understood that her simple choice yesterday, her choice to protect a stranger when no one else would, was the start of something bigger than herself. And with that thought, she stepped inside, ready to face whatever the ripple of her actions might bring tomorrow. The morning air in Brookside felt different that day. There was a low hum in the streets, a kind of energy that hadn't been there before. The usual quiet calm had been replaced by the distant rumble of engines. Lila, as she opened her diner, noticed it immediately. At first, she thought it might be a small group of bikers like yesterday, but this time the sound was louder, deeper, impossible to ignore. It rolled through the streets and carried with it a sense of power, presence, and inevitability. Lila paused for a moment at the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. She could feel her heartbeat quicken. Something was coming, and she had a feeling it wasn't just a few people. Her mind raced. Was it the police? A protest? Or something connected to Cole and the bikers from yesterday? She reminded herself to stay calm, to keep the diner a safe place, and to trust her instincts. Then she saw them. At first, there were only a few motorcycles turning the corner, but quickly more appeared, their engines blending into a steady, thunderous roar. Riders in black leather jackets, boots, and helmets filled the street, riding with purpose. Lila stepped closer to the window, her eyes widening. She tried to count, but soon realized it was impossible. There were too many, more than she could have imagined. At least 100, maybe 200 bikers had arrived in Brookside. The sheer size of it made her stomach tighten, a mix of awe, nervousness, and disbelief. Cole led the group, moving confidently at the front. Lila could see him nodding and gesturing, organizing the riders without a word. There was a precision, a discipline, and yet a raw energy in their movements that made it clear this was no random gathering. They had come with purpose, and that purpose was unmistakably connected to her. The bikers began to park in neat rows in front of the diner. Engines rumbled and idled, the sound vibrating through the ground and the air. Pedestrians stopped in their tracks, children paused mid-step, and shopkeepers stepped out onto their porches, all of them staring in stunned silence. The scene was overwhelming. Lila felt a mix of fear and curiosity, unsure whether this would be a peaceful visit or something more dangerous. She took a deep breath and stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron, determined to remain calm and grounded. Cole dismounted first and approached her with his usual calm. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. "I hope you're ready." Lila swallowed, her throat dry. I think so," she replied cautiously. "What's all this about?" Cole smiled faintly. "You protected me yesterday. That means something to us, a lot. We want to show our appreciation and make sure you know that what you did doesn't go unnoticed." Lila felt her chest tighten. She had known that the bikers respected her for defending Cole, but she hadn't imagined this scale. 200 people all here for her? It was surreal, almost dreamlike. She felt overwhelmed, but she also felt a surge of pride. She had acted out of compassion, not to receive attention or reward. And yet the world had responded in a way she could never have predicted. The bikers began to approach the diner slowly, moving in a respectful, organized way. Lila noticed that there was no aggression in their movements. They didn't crowd or push. They were courteous, almost careful, aware that this was her space. As they entered, the diners inside fell silent, watching as the leather-clad riders filled the room. The smell of motorcycles mixed with the aroma of coffee and breakfast, creating an unusual but not unpleasant atmosphere. Cole spoke quietly to the group. "Remember why we're here. Respect the place. Respect her. This isn't about intimidation, it's about gratitude." The bikers nodded, understanding immediately. They spread throughout the diner, some sitting at booths, others at the counter. They didn't make demands. They didn't cause chaos. Instead, they ordered coffee, food, and pie, treating the diner with the same care they would show their own homes. Lila served them carefully, her hand steady even though her heart raced. She realized that this was not a threat, it was a gesture, a way of honoring her bravery and kindness. One of the bikers, a man with a long beard and kind eyes, approached Lila. "You didn't have to do what you did yesterday," he said softly. "Most people wouldn't, but you did, and we remember that. That's why we're here." Lila nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. I did what felt right," she said. "I didn't expect anyone to notice." The man smiled gently. "Sometimes the right thing gets noticed more than we think." Throughout the morning, the bikers remained calm and respectful, but their presence was impossible to ignore. Locals passed by, stopping to watch, whispering quietly to each other. Lila noticed that some neighbors were curious, some were cautious, and others were openly amazed. The story of the diner and the woman who had protected a biker was spreading quickly, and now it had a visual proof, hundreds of bikers showing their appreciation. As the hours passed, Lila began to see how powerful a single act of courage could be. Her choice to stand up for Cole had created a ripple, and it had grown larger than she could have imagined. These bikers, loyal to each other and now connected to her, had turned a simple act of kindness into something remarkable, something that would be remembered for a long time. Cole returned to her side, speaking quietly. "You've changed the way people see us," he said. "Not just the bikers, but the town too. You showed them that loyalty, courage, and humanity can exist anywhere, and you've earned our respect, our trust. That's not something we give lightly." Lila listened, feeling a mix of pride, humility, and disbelief. She had never sought recognition, never imagined that her actions could have this effect. Yet here it was in a tangible, undeniable form. She realized that courage and compassion could transcend fear, prejudice, and assumptions. They could connect people from completely different worlds, showing that respect and humanity were universal. By mid-afternoon, the bikers had finished their meals, cleaned up after themselves, and prepared to leave. Cole approached Lila one last time. "We'll be back," he said simply. "Not to cause trouble, but to show that loyalty and respect go both ways. You stood up when it mattered, and that doesn't get forgotten. People remember that even in our world." Lila nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't expected. "I hope so," she replied. "I just want to do the right thing." As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and rode off, the ground vibrating beneath their engines, Lila watched in awe. The streets returned to normal, the hum of the town resuming its usual rhythm. But something had shifted. She felt a quiet pride, a deep sense of connection to the world beyond her small town, and a knowledge that her actions had created something meaningful. Later, as she closed the diner for the evening, Lila reflected on the day. Courage was not always about confrontation or violence. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was about standing firm, showing empathy, and protecting what was right even when no one else would. Her actions had created respect, gratitude, and loyalty in ways she hadn't imagined possible. The streets of Brookside were calm now, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Lila walked home slowly, her mind replaying the events of the day. She understood that life was unpredictable, that small acts could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could never be foreseen. And she knew that tomorrow might bring even more surprises, more challenges, and more opportunities to see the impact of her courage. As she stepped inside her home, locking the door behind her, Lila felt a quiet sense of readiness. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, and she had done so with empathy and strength. And she knew that no matter what happened next, she had learned a powerful lesson, that one act of courage, one act of kindness could resonate far beyond what anyone could imagine, bridging worlds, connecting people, and creating moments of unforgettable humanity. The morning after the bikers' massive visit, Lila woke up to a quiet house, the sunlight spilling softly through her windows. Brookside seemed calm the way it always had, yet she felt different. Something inside her had shifted. The events of the past few days, the confrontation with the police, Cole's quiet gratitude, and the hundreds of bikers who had come to her diner, had left a mark. She felt a sense of pride, yes, but also a deeper understanding of courage, respect, and human connection. As she opened her diner, the smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air as usual. But the street seemed busier than normal. People passed by with a little more curiosity than usual, glancing at the diner with a knowing look. Some whispered to one another, pointing occasionally, and Lila realized the story of her courage had begun to spread. What had started as a quiet act of kindness had become a local legend of sorts. She shook her head, smiling softly. She had never sought recognition, and yet here it was in the most unexpected way. Customers arrived, some returning from the previous day, others new faces drawn by the buzz around the diner. Lila greeted them all with her usual warmth, making them feel welcome. She served coffee, fried eggs, and pancakes, all the while keeping a careful eye on the street. There was a soft energy in the town, a sense that life had shifted slightly, that people were noticing the small moments that could have big meaning. By mid-morning, she noticed familiar rumbling in the distance. The motorcycles were back, not as many as the day before, but enough to draw attention. Cole arrived first, riding slowly, scanning the street, followed by a few bikers. Their approach felt different this time. It was calm, respectful, and deliberate, not the chaotic energy that newcomers might expect from outsiders. Lila felt her chest tighten slightly, anticipation and curiosity mingling. Cole parked near the diner and dismounted, removing his helmet and giving her a small, reassuring smile. "Morning," he said simply. "We wanted to check in." Lila nodded, a faint smile forming. "I'm glad to see you're all safe." Cole gestured to his friends. "We've been talking about yesterday and the day before. You don't understand yet what you've done. Protecting me. Standing up to the police. It meant more than you know." Lila shook her head. "I just did what I felt was right. That's all." He looked at her steadily. "Sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing. You didn't just do what was right. You did what mattered. You reminded people, inside and outside our world, that respect, courage, and humanity can exist anywhere." The bikers around him nodded silently, their expressions serious yet calm. Lila felt a lump in her throat. She had acted without expectation, without reward, yet her actions had inspired something profound. She realized, in a way she hadn't before, how much influence a single person could have simply by choosing to act with compassion. Throughout the morning, the bikers stayed in the diner, not to cause trouble but simply to be present. They drank coffee, ate breakfast, and quietly observed. Lila continued to serve them, feeling a sense of calm amidst the extraordinary circumstances. The diners who came in noticed the respectful way the bikers behaved, the care they took not to disturb the regular flow of the restaurant. It was a stark contrast to the common stereotypes people had about such groups. Cole leaned slightly toward her as she brought him another cup of coffee. "You've changed the way we see the world," he said softly. "And not just us. Your courage has a ripple effect. People notice. It spreads." Lila listened, absorbing his words. She realized that small actions could create waves far beyond what she could see. By protecting a single person in a moment of need, she had bridged worlds, challenged assumptions, and created respect where there might have been fear. Her actions had reminded people, bikers, locals, and even herself, that humanity could be found in the most unexpected places. Later that afternoon, the bikers began to prepare to leave. Cole approached Lila one last time before mounting his bike. "We'll be back," he said calmly. "Not because we have to, but because loyalty and respect run both ways. You stood up when it mattered." "We won't forget that." Lila smiled softly, feeling a deep warmth in her chest. "I'll be here," she replied. "I'll always do what I believe is right." The bikers mounted their motorcycles, their engines rumbling softly as they rolled away from the diner. Lila watched them disappear down the street, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and awe. The streets of Brookside returned to their usual calm, but she knew nothing would be quite the same. The experience had left its mark on the town, on the people who witnessed it, and on her own sense of self. That evening, after closing the diner, Lila walked through the quiet streets, reflecting on the past few days. Courage, she realized, wasn't always about confrontation or grand gestures. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was a matter of standing firm, showing empathy, and refusing to let fear or prejudice dictate one's actions. Her choice to protect Cole had been a small act in the moment, but its consequences had been profound. She also realized the power of gratitude and loyalty. The bikers had shown her respect not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through her actions. Their presence had reminded her that kindness and courage could transcend boundaries, bridging gaps between people from entirely different worlds. The reflection left Lila with a sense of humility. She had done what she felt was right, but she had also learned something important. One act of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could never be fully measured. Respect, humanity, and integrity were contagious. Her actions had reminded people, both bikers and locals alike, that these values could exist.